Right now, I mean, millions of people are scrolling past these pastel sunsets on their feeds, and they're overlaid with the comforting, elegant, cursive poetry of Rumi.
Oh, absolutely. The classic internet aesthetics.
Exactly. Quotes about how the wound is where the light enters you, or just these gentle musings on the soul.
Right.
But what those internet-friendly posts entirely hide is that the man who actually wrote them was forged in geopolitical terror. He was subjected to a brutal 9-year psychological crucible,
Yeah, and ultimately transformed by a suspected murder.
which is wild.
It's a profound disconnect. We've collectively taken one of history's most rigorous, intellectually formidable spiritual figures, and, we've just flattened him into the patron saint of motivational posters.
Today's deep dive takes us into two incredible texts provided by the Threshold Society. They detail the chaotic, intense, real-life journey of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi and the ancient philosophical framework of Sufism that shaped him.
Which is so needed.
Our mission for you, the listener, is to shatter that pastel glass. We're going to look at the roaring fire that actually produced this poetry and really discover how Sufism offers a razor-sharp, highly relevant antidote to our modern era of anxiety and information overload.
It really is an antidote.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because we have to start by dismantling the myth that Rumi was just born this ecstatic, wandering poet. He was built.
Built is definitely the right word. His foundation was intensely academic, and his early life was entirely defined by massive upheaval.
Right.
So you see, Rumi was born in 1207 in Balkh, which is in modern-day Afghanistan. But he doesn't get to stay there and have a peaceful childhood.
No, because the Mongols are invading. We are talking about the armies of Genghis Khan, just an apocalyptic military force sweeping across the region.
Yeah, so his family is forced to flee. They become refugees.
They endure this massive, dangerous migration before eventually settling far away in Konya, Turkey. That was the capital of the Seljuk Empire at the time. And his father, Bahodin, was this towering religious teacher who secured a prestigious position at the university there.
And that environment sets the stage for a very specific kind of intellectual upbringing.
Like, highly rigorous.
Exactly. Rumi is initially tutored by his father, receiving a classical, rigid theological education. But the real shift, the major turning point, happens when the baton is passed to his father's close friend, a man named Said Burineddin.
The historical accounts of this transition are just wild. Said was miles and miles away in Afghanistan, and he actually felt his friend's death.
Yes.
He intrinsically knew that Bahodin had passed away, and he realized immediately that he had to travel all the way to Konya to take over the spiritual education of this 24-year-old Rumi.
And this wasn't, casual mentorship where they met for tea once a week to chat about philosophy. This was a 9-year crucible.
Wow, 9 years.
Yeah. Sayed instructed Rumi in what the texts call the science of the prophets and states.
I want to pause there because the science of the prophets and states, I mean, it sounds mystical, but what does it actually mean mechanistically? What is the science part of this?
Well, what's fascinating here is that in the Sufi framework, a state is a psychological or spiritual condition. Things like profound awe, contraction, expansion, or deep sorrow.
Okay.
So the science of it is the rigorous, almost clinical mapping of the human psyche. Sayed wasn't just teaching Rumi theology. He was teaching him how to navigate the absolute extremes of human consciousness without losing his mind.
Basically like getting an intense monastic PhD.
Yeah.
And he forced him into those extremes practically, right?
He really did. The training kicked off with a strict 40-day retreat.
Intense fasting.
Right. Extreme isolation and meditation. You're stripping away the outside world, sleep, and food to break down the brain's default operating system.
But the texts claim that this extreme discipline in Sufism is aimed at transforming the false self, because the unenlightened human state is actually a form of slavery.
Yeah.
And I have to push back on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, slavery, that feels extreme. Most people today, especially you listening right now, would say that making our own choices, what to buy, what career to pursue, who to date, is the exact definition of freedom.
Sure, it feels like freedom until you examine where those choices actually come from.
What do you mean?
The core Sufi belief is that what we call choices are usually just knee-jerk biological and social programming. You are enslaved to your ego, your anxieties, your desire for status, and the constant contradictory impulses of your false self.
So you're just acting out a script.
Exactly. You think you're the king of your castle, but you're actually a hostage to your own appetites.
Oh, wow. So fasting for 40 days isn't just about depriving the body. It's a literal rebellion against that internal tyrant. You're proving to your ego that it isn't in charge.
Precisely. The original root meaning of the word Islam is submission. And in this context, submission is about harmonizing the individual self with the divine by overthrowing that tyrant.
Right.
If your ego is sitting on the throne, it cuts you off from the heart. And in Sufism, the heart isn't a biological pump, and it's not the seat of romantic emotion. It is the chief organ for perceiving objective reality.
It's like, think of the heart as a lens. If the ego is in the way, the lens is blocked by your own reflection.
That's a great way to put it.
You can't see the world. You only see your own desires superimposed on the world. So Sayyid puts Rumi through this 9-year polishing of the lens. Rumi even spends 4 years in Aleppo and Damascus studying with the greatest minds of the era.
And eventually, Said tells Rumi his education is complete. He calls him a lion of knowledge, an academic master with literally no equal.
But being a lion of knowledge is actually Rumi's biggest obstacle.
Well, yeah. Said recognizes that the vessel is perfectly constructed, it's flawless, but he also recognizes that it's just a vessel and it's cold.
Right, it's empty.
So before he leaves, he makes a prophecy to Rumi. He says, "A great friend will come to you, and you will be each other's mirror."
Which brings us to the ultimate catalyst. Because Rumi is 37 years old now. He's an eminent professor of religion. He's wealthy, respected, surrounded by students who just hang on his every word.
He's totally secure in his life.
And into this perfectly ordered life
Yeah.
drops Shams of Tabriz.
And Shams is the complete antithesis of the settled academic. He's described as a spiritual vagabond, a wanderer. The accounts actually liken Rumi meeting Shams to the biblical Abraham meeting Melchizedek.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Shams wasn't just an eccentric traveler. He was a messenger operating directly from the source.
The metaphor the texts use here is brilliant. Rumi was too full while Shams was burning. And here's where it gets really interesting. Think of Rumi before Shams as a high-performance engine.
Okay, I like that.
It's perfectly engineered, the mechanics are flawless, but the engine is completely flooded with too much fuel. He has too much academic knowledge, too much rigid theory. Shams is the spark. He drops in, and suddenly that flooded engine catches fire.
And that transition is instantaneous, and it's violent. Rumi goes from a dignified academic mystic to an inspired, ecstatic lover of humanity.
He didn't just learn new theology.
No, Shams didn't sit down and teach Rumi new facts to memorize. He ignited the theological fuel that was already there, completely shattering the rigid academic vessel that held it.
But the tragedy of this story is how brief their friendship was. I mean, they become inseparable, perfect mirrors for each other's souls. But then Shams disappears.
Yeah, twice, actually.
Right, the first time he vanishes, Rumi is utterly devastated. His son, Sultan Veled, has to travel to Damascus to track Shams down and just beg him to return.
But the second disappearance is final, and the historical consensus is dark. Shams was likely murdered by people in Rumi's own inner circle.
By his own student.
Yes, his own followers, who were fiercely jealous of the massive influence this homeless vagabond had over their respected professor.
Rumi is left in a state of absolute devastation. The very person who finally woke him up is ripped away in the most violent, betraying manner possible.
It's unimaginable grief.
And I'm struggling with this jump in the narrative, honestly. Because human nature dictates that when your greatest friend is murdered by your own trusted circle, you do not become a universal poet of love.
You'd think not.
You become a cynic. You become bitter, vindictive, misanthropic. How exactly does a trauma of that magnitude create a masterpiece of human empathy instead of, like, a villain?
It's all about the alchemy of their relationship. The trauma destroyed the last stubborn remnants of Rumi's ego. Think of the ego like a heavy dampener resting on a piano string.
Okay.
As long as the dampener is there, the string can only make a dull thud. While Shams was alive, Rumi loved Shams. The love had a specific container, a specific direction.
Right.
But when Shams was murdered, that specific container was shattered. The dampener was ripped off the piano string.
Oh, wow. He didn't just love Shams anymore. He became the frequency of love itself.
Yes, that is the ultimate alchemy of Sufism. The goal of loving the divine is to entirely forget yourself in the beloved. Rumi realized that the intense, burning love he felt for Shams was actually the divine current of love flowing through Shams.
So the source wasn't Shams, it was the divine.
Exactly. With Shams gone and his own ego completely obliterated by grief, Rumi became a pure conductor for that current. He started resonating with everyone and everything, seeing the beloved in every face he encountered.
And that ego death unlocks an absolutely staggering state of creative flow. This is the transition into his monumental output, specifically the dictation of the Mathnawi.
Right.
And for context, a Mathnawi is a poetic form meaning rhyming couplets.
Sure.
But Rumi's Mathnawi isn't just a poem, it is a massive, sprawling work of over 25,000 verses.
It's widely considered one of the greatest spiritual masterpieces ever produced by human consciousness.
And the physical process of how those 25,000 verses were captured is just as astonishing as the philosophy inside them. Rumi is now in his early 50s. He's wandering through the Meram vineyards with his close companion, Husameddin Chalabi.
Yes, his new companion.
And Husameddin turns to him and suggests writing a book for troubadours. Something accessible, like the works of Sanai or Attar, so everyday people can memorize the verses and compose music to them.
Basically, he's asking for a masterpiece for the masses, and Rumi's response is incredibly understated.
He just smiles, reaches into the folds of his turban, and pulls out a piece of paper. And it already contains the first 18 lines of the Mathnawi.
Starting with those iconic words.
Yeah. Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation.
Husameddin weeps with joy right there in the vineyard, and he begs Rumi to write volumes more. Rumi agrees, but on one condition. He says, if you consent to write for me, I will recite.
This is the part that blows my mind. For the entire creation of this 25,000-verse masterpiece, Rumi never held a pen. Husameddin's accounts describe a state of pure, unadulterated flow. Wherever they were walking through the schools, soaking in the Iljan hot springs, or just sitting in the chaotic, noisy public baths of Konya, Rumi would spontaneously start reciting.
And Husameddin would scramble to write it all down.
Sometimes working day and night for several days straight, other times the tap would shut off, and Rumi wouldn't compose anything for 2 years. But when the current flowed, it was a deluge.
And what poured out was not sanitized, airy-fairy spiritual theory.
Definitely not.
The Mathnawi captures the entire messy spectrum of human existence. It features vulgar human behaviors, domestic squabbles, gritty politics, crude sexuality. And then it seamlessly pivots into the most sublime, breathtaking levels of cosmic awareness.
He is dictating poetry that bridges heaven and mud. And he's doing it while sitting half-naked in a crowded public bathhouse.
Exactly.
It perfectly illustrates a quote from an early Sufi master, Abu Muhammad Mutaish, found in our texts. He said, "The Sufi is he whose thought keeps pace with his foot." Is Rumi's ability to dictate in a bathhouse the ultimate example of this?
Oh, absolutely. That quote is the ultimate corrective to how we usually view mysticism. We have this cartoon image of a mystic as someone who retreats into a dark cave, closes their eyes, completely detaches from physical reality, and tries to be absent from the world to find God.
Right, escaping the noise to find the signal.
But Mutaish is arguing the exact opposite mechanism. The goal is presence without absence. It means being entirely radically present with yourself and with the divine simultaneously.
So your soul is exactly where your body is.
Yes. When Rumi is dictating in the hot springs, he isn't ignoring the heat of the water or the conversations of the men around him to think about God. He is experiencing the divine reality through the heat of the water and the noise of the bathhouse.
He doesn't need to escape the mundane world.
Because he perceives the divine infused within every atom of it.
But wait, experiencing the divine in a 13th century hot spring is an amazing historical anecdote. But how does that translate to someone stuck in gridlock traffic, aggressively scrolling Instagram today? Why does a 700-year-old mystic who never held a pen matter to you, the listener, right now?
It matters because the philosophical tradition of Sufism feels like it was custom engineered to treat the exact psychological sicknesses we are drowning in today.
How so?
Well, the cultural context of Rumi's tradition is highly universal. The texts note that his language, Persian, is a fascinating linguistic crossroads. It's an Indo-European language, structurally akin to our own, but heavily influenced by Semitic Arabic vocabulary.
The historical accounts liken it to a blend of French and Hebrew. It sits right in the middle of East and West.
And that linguistic bridge mirrors a spiritual bridge. Sufism operates deeply within the matrix of Islam, but it recognizes humanity as one single ecology.
One universe.
Right. It explicitly honors prophets across traditions, Moses, Jesus, Abraham, David. It asserts that the core operating system of all these teachings was identical, waking humanity up from the delusion of selfish egoism.
The texts explicitly position Sufism as a direct, uncompromising critique of worldliness. It provides an escape route from a bankrupt, materialistic culture that it describes as neurotically individualistic, narcissistic, and ridden with anxiety.
They're describing the 13th century, but they might as well be describing a modern tech symposium.
Exactly. The symptoms haven't changed. We just have fiber optic cables to broadcast our narcissism faster.
The diagnosis is spot on, but Sufism also provides the prescription.
And we need it because the ultimate irony of our era is that despite unprecedented hyperconnectivity, our group chats, our social media updates, our ability to video call across the globe, instantly we feel more alienated, lonely, and anxious than at any point in human history.
We really do.
We are suffocating in the labyrinth of our own personal brands. So how does the Sufi practice of remembrance actually function as a practical tool against this modern exhaustion?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand the mechanism of remembrance or dhikr, we have to understand the disease. The modern world suffers from what the text calls the tyranny of the ego.
Okay.
We have created massive false idols out of our own identities. Our avatars, our LinkedIn resumes, our perfectly curated feeds. These are all monuments to the superficial self.
And propping those monuments up requires massive amounts of psychological calories.
Exactly. Sufism argues that your deep modern exhaustion isn't just from working too many hours. It's from the heavy lifting required to keep your fake self propped up for everyone to see.
Wow.
In our obsession with maintaining this false self, we have turned our backs on the source. And the text makes a profound assertion. By forgetting the divine, we haven't just lost spirituality, we have actually forgotten ourselves.
We have lost access to our own underlying operating system because we're too busy staring at the screensaver of our ego.
Precisely. Mechanistically, remembrance is a cognitive pattern interrupt. It is the active, repetitive turning of the attention back to the source.
How do you do that?
Sometimes through reciting divine attributes, sometimes through breathing to intentionally interrupt the brain's default ego-driven loops. It's a method of reactivating the essential self.
To remind yourself of who you really are.
Right. It reminds you that your capacities for awareness and love don't actually belong to your exhausting, fragile ego. They belong to a universal current. You are just individualizing that current.
It takes the crushing pressure off. You don't have to be the generator. You just have to plug back into the main power grid.
Beautifully said.
And when you trace the arc of Rumi's life, it is the ultimate case study of this exact journey. He starts as a traumatized refugee fleeing the Mongol terror. He endures 9 brutal years of psychological and academic discipline in Konya, polishing the lens of his intellect, only to realize he had merely built an unlit vessel.
A vessel that required the spark of a wandering vagabond to catch fire.
And through the brutal devastation of losing Shams, Rumi's ego is permanently shattered, the dampeners removed from the string. He taps into that universal frequency and leaves behind a 25,000-verse masterpiece, dictated on the fly, bridging the filth of the bathhouse with the sublimity of the cosmos.
It's an incredible legacy.
This deep dive into a 13th century poet isn't just a history lesson. It is a stark mirror held up to our own distracted, exhausted lives.
Which leaves us with a critical question to consider as we navigate our own modern labyrinths. If Sufism teaches that the superficial personality is a false idol, and that maintaining it is the source of our exhaustion, what parts of your own daily identity, your job title, your social media bio, your carefully managed public image are just modern versions of the enslaved ego, silently blocking you from accessing your true essential self?